Today we're going to talk about corporate giving. We're going to talk about foundational giving, meaning both governments, all types of foundations, donor advised, corporate foundations, community foundations, various types of foundations. And then we're also going to talk about individual giving, changes coming up with the One Big Beautiful Bill for tax law implications. And then it's fundraising, so we'll briefly touch on events and what we're seeing as well for those in the nonprofit world. I'm going to start with corporate giving. So over the last year, corporate has actually shown huge stock market gains and increases, and corporations are actually making money. We've seen the entire year where we're all tentative about spending, not quite sure what we're doing as individuals, but financially, if we just go to look at the stock market, and when we see those sorts of things, we're actually seeing corporate money has gone up almost every single quarter consistently. We had a little bloop happening kind of like mid-September with then a fairly quick rebound. So overall, I would expect corporate giving to go up in 2026 throughout the entire year. And corporate giving, of course, we're talking about corporate sponsorships. That'll also be reflected in corporate foundations and corporate relations in general, potentially matching gifts that individuals give from corporations, but highly recommend that corporate giving is a large part of your strategy for fundraising in 2026. Leading into corporations, we're going to reflect then what that means for foundations. We'll start first with community corporate foundations and donor advised funds, as most of those are organizations that the money they give is based on what they have in endowment and investments. Therefore, since they're investing in corporations, we're going to see money go up there also. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting more money, unfortunately. What we're still going to see is that it's going to be highly competitive when you're going to your corporate foundations, your community foundations, donor advised funds, because there's still going to be less government money going out. So it's going to be more people chasing after the non-government money, especially in the areas for what things that government is no longer funding. And I am going to touch on that too, for what we're expecting and seeing. So with this higher demand, and people going after this funding, even though these organizations have more, we're definitely seeing a lot more where foundations are moving to invite only, and sometimes restricting their areas. I'll be very specific on these sorts of things. Bank of America, normally their online applications nationwide are available by now, and we're seeing that they're pushing it back a month or two as they're revamping what they consider their priorities to be. We're also seeing things like Kentucky Fried Wishes of Kentucky Fried Chicken, also translation to invite only. Just yesterday, I saw the Inasmuch Foundation, fairly decent sized foundation supporting Oklahoma and previously Colorado, publicly say that after evaluating what's going on in the world and how they're seeing government funding, they're focusing in on only Oklahoma. So as these organizations do see more and more demand, while they have more money to give, they might be focusing in on what it is they want to give to, how they want to contribute to society. Sometimes we're seeing them being very specific to, we're only providing funding like Kohler. We all have fancy sinks at some point in time in our house, where Kohler is saying things like only the community where we are headquartered in this year. So we need to keep that in mind as we're going to research. The ones that you always were able to ask might have a little bit of change going on. So with that, it's going to become equally as important we always talk about individual giving and the importance of stewardship, being nice to your donors, maintaining relationships. We're going to need to really continue to see that in the, foundation world as well. Reaching out to our grant officers, reaching out to those that have been the ones to always give us the checks, the ones that have come for the site visit, and keeping them highly in the loop to really foster those relationships as they're becoming pickier on who it is they want to support or not support. And then government is starting to look drastically different. And this is not a reflection on, politics sort of thing. It's just what we're currently seeing. So the government has made it very clear that starting January 1, 2027, for individuals to be able to stay enrolled in Medicaid and Medicare, that they're actually going to be required to work 20 hours a week. So you could now be 75, but required to work 20 hours a week to keep your benefits. You could be a single mother of four, but now be required to work 20 hours a week to keep your benefits. And all of us know that medical care is not inexpensive in the US. So we're bracing to see drastically different things. Most of the US states have come out and said in reaction to this that there's certain things they're going to be funding less of and certain things they're going to be funding more of. As we're unsure what's going on in those various aspects, the states are expecting to see an increase in needs for food insecurity. So food banks, potential of funding for free and reduced lunch as a terms of federal money with changes in the Department of Education that we've seen. So the states are bracing for what it is they're going to have to be able to spend more on. So to go with that, states have very openly said what they're expecting to spend money on in terms of state, government funding, food insecurity, workforce, and childcare. And I realize that that last one sounds interesting, and it's interesting in a variety of different ways. States are going to be looking to fund childcare, even to grants to for-profit companies. Because if you're going to have a single mother of four coming to work, she's going to need to figure out childcare. So as they're looking to pay her, there's going to be huge incentives offered to corporations or nonprofits that also want to add childcare facilities at the place of work. So looking at huge things like that. No one wants to see a child or an elderly individual starve. So we're going to see huge props in food insecurity of what's coming out. And then the other reason for workforce continues to be that with our current administration, they really want to be focusing on a hand up, not a hand out. So they want to see more and more people trained to enter the workforce in construction-oriented industries, in trade-oriented industries, less of a focus on college, sort of thing. So more of, in Colorado, we have a large number of grants called Opportunity Now. So it's that concept of what is your opportunity now for how quickly can we train you to get you into a job instead of putting you through multiple years of education. So definitely a shift in priorities. We're of course seeing less things that are being supported in the area of education, as we're talking about the change of the Department of Education. There's been drastic cuts, even complete department cuts at point in time when we talk about things that the government used to fund for FAFSA and helping people get into college. About a year ago, we saw several universities, University of the Arts in Philadelphia, a variety of small colleges throughout the United States that actually openly closed because they were seeing less college enrollments. So we need to keep a lookout for that. Those individuals are going to be relying more heavily on individual giving and private sector giving than they will be on government. Then the government's also been very open about changes in how they're supporting healthcare and mental health. So as we look at those sorts of things, mental health, and then also, as I said, stop on mental health and health in general, things like VOCA, the Victims of Crime Act, massive reductions planned year over year for the last 5 years for those that are domestic violence victims and funding. So these people in education are going to be the ones that are more critically chasing down the dollars from community foundations, corporate foundations, and donor advised funds. So we're really entering a phase of the world where corporations and individuals are going to need to be responsible for helping to see the things that are important to them succeed well. This is actually kind of almost small business minded, in the way that if we love something, we want to pay and support it. And we're going to be really moving to that kind of a society. It's actually a very mix in mentality of both Democratic and Republican. So it really becomes, if it is important to you, you better be willing to step up and help support it. How do you feel about these changes, Peter, as I'm talking about them and what we're seeing in the world?
Well, you mentioned, for example, in childcare, it's interesting. Like even down the street from here, Lego used to headquarter in Enfield. They're no longer in Enfield. They moved out due to economic stuff over the last few years, as you were mentioning. But anyway, they always had a Lego daycare across the street from their headquarters. And so if people from other who needed daycare could have used it, but it was specifically made for the employees who could bring their kids to work and right, single mom, single dad, so on and so forth. So I think that, and I've seen in workforce development and social development, social program development in Springfield and in other areas around the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and other states that I have peripheral vision through personal experiences and people who live boots on the ground, or I work with organizations there. And you've seen that over the years, that the gap, right? You can talk about it, right? If you make so much money, you don't qualify for these programs, but you qualify for that, right? So there's always this gap, right, through business social work and what the government lawmakers are making, which is not, it makes sense, right? Because they're not working together, they're working in tandem, but two different things. But I think that what you're talking about is definitely, I've seen that work over the years. I think that the fact of the matter that you were talking about in 2026 and people are eating it up, I think it's just we're looking back and we're saying, listen, if you truly care and you have a passion about something, you're gonna take a shirt off, right? Off your back. So you're willing to do that, you're willing to stand up, and your level of involvement could be very different, same way how your level of donations could be very different, your level of activism could be very different, what have you. So I think from that perspective, it's definitely great because, again, like you said, it's not partisan, it's bipartisan because, again, the politics don't matter, the social element doesn't matter. What matters is that we're here as humans, and this is the system we have. We can work with our lawmakers and such, but the realization of it is that this is what makes people tick. So it worked before. If you're passionate about something, you love your grandma, you're going to go help your grandma. If your grandma started a pasta shop, you're going to go and make flyers for your grandma, right? So it's like, it's not new. The concept is new. It's just really being passionate about something. And, because I think that then it's less performative and it becomes more stable and sustainable.
Yes. One of the things, not political, but factual, I do want to comment on also with government grants is the importance of, if you're going after them, fully reading all the guidelines. I was reading one the other day where it was talking about the Department of Labor, and they referenced new recording standards and sort of things, where part of that included things like you were collecting the information as the nonprofit if you chose to participate in the grant on legal status. If you're an American citizen, however you're here, if you're a newcomer, an immigrant, whatever word you're most comfortable using, but then you're reporting that back. So I would also highly encourage people, if they are going after federal funding, depending on the type of nonprofit you run and who you're servicing. If you're servicing domestic violence victims that don't speak English and may not be documented, you really need to read the paperwork before you decide to apply. We're just talking about being knowledgeable about what you're potentially inviting, into your nonprofit, how you're contracting your people, how you're reporting about your people. And again, this goes to individual preference of nonprofit. So whoever you are, we have entered a period of time where you need to take the time to make sure that you're completely knowledgeable about what might be required of you, what you might be able to share about the people, what you have to share about the people that you're serving in various ways. And this is all about personal choice as a nonprofit. If this is the sort of thing that is not scary to the people you serve, there could be some great opportunities. If this is the sort of thing that's scary to the people you serve, you just need to take the time to make sure you're really going through. And when you're not sure, you should definitely be reaching out to a specialist to review those sorts of things for you. I'm going to kick off our individual giving conversation with commentaries about tax implication changes from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Again, this is informational, informative, factual, not opinionated sort of versions. So when we look at the tax implication changes, increasing, the general deduction sort of thing is going to have a bigger benefit to the common man, not necessarily the wealthy, when they go to fill out their taxes. So if you're not itemizing, you're going to have a bigger deduction, which means that the everyday person would have the ability to maintain the gifts that they've been already making to your organization, or possibly even increase them slightly. One of my big suggestions for 2026 in individual giving would be to try and focus as much as you can on your regular core audience, not your major gifts, but your general annual fund, As often as possible when we talk about the importance of cash flow, potentially looking more and more at, monthly giving. We know that NPRs are always typically, NPR is typically very, very good at this. Often zoos are good at this. But more and more nonprofits looking at monthly giving would really help with your sustainability and cash flow knowledges. Then when we look at your, larger gifts, sort of thing, it's going to be more complicated to have standardized deduction. I've seen forecasts where it's up to a 30% less positive aspect for a wealthy individual when they're going to make their tax deduction. Now, I am not a tax professional. I am just capable of reading articles online and looking at various things. So Peter and I are going to make a point of providing all of you with a great link, sort of things from a tax foundation to help better educate you on what's possible with this great big beautiful world when we're talking about the everyday man versus a more wealthier individual who might be, deducting and itemizing and how it's going to really change for them. While it might be less beneficial for a wealthy individual to do the tax deductions, what I'm predicting might be possible, again, this one is speculative, is I could see more wealthy individuals pausing to start family foundations, to take better, donor advised funds and take better usage of those tax breaks. This is complicated in the subject, Peter. I don't know if you have an opinion on you personally, what you see yourself giving to more or less on in the changes of the tax laws.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you can look at the tax law again from the variety of different perspective, right? Like even if you split it up between 1% and 99% of the people, there's such a there's such a first there's such a gap between those two. Secondly, within the 1%, there's huge classes of difference there, and so is within the 99%. So I mean, again, some people's strategy is to use IRS as a savings bank, and then they get their $3,000-4,000 at the end of the year. They work it into the workflow. Some people, claim and, like I said, itemize throughout the year, so they're in charge of their own money. I think that what's important to see is really what was the purpose for this, and right, like to ignite some economic boost to get things going. So I think that again we saw influx of money given during COVID, right, through those distributions. That was a little bit different to me again because that was almost like printing money and kind of creating that little bubble there. Where I feel like this is slightly changing the law, hopefully with the realization that it needed to be changed because we need to adequately support these type of people with these type of tax liabilities throughout the year, and this is their income level too. So I think from the kind of what you're talking about, all the different levels of giving, I do agree. I think that there's definitely going to be a pocket of individuals who might have the momentum with their wealth, right? So the saying is rich get richer exists for a reason, because, right, if you're already on the roll and you're having this momentum interest, whatever, you're working hard or you have investments or somebody, gave you a hedge fund, what have you, this is only going to contribute towards that. So ideologically, right, if they are a giver and then they care about humanity and social justice and all these things, a lot of nonprofits kind of stand for, if they're socially driven, I think that new funds will rise, new people get together and create maybe even trusts that will make donations. So I think that empowering people who are part of the workforce and stretching their dollar a little bit better to give them that feeling of being passionate or having an extra buck, I think is important, and I think we're definitely going to see a shift due to that in nonprofit giving.
It's definitely going to be interesting as we talk about these various class two. So while the 1%, the wealthy, will have less regular yearly tax implications with the one big beautiful bill, I want to pause and talk a little bit about the IRA rollover. This is something that it's that moment when I realize I'm getting old. About 15, 16 years ago, under the Obama administration, this became a permanent sort of thing in US culture. And then under the current big beautiful bill, it actually has better tax implications. So I want to explain what this is because, again, while a lot of us do not fit into this category of the 1% and also are not 70 and a half years or older, as nonprofit professionals, when you're looking at your audience and who your donors are, this is very important to make sure we understand. So for individuals who are 70 and a half, you can have a better deduction, and we're going to be sharing some information on this that you can download afterwards, on the IRA rollover. So the IRA rollover, most of us have a basic knowledge of IRAs. So when you put money into a traditional IRA, you do not pay taxes on it. The benefit of the IRA rollover is that when you donate money directly from your IRA, when you are more than 70 and a half years old, and you give it directly to a nonprofit, you also don't pay taxes on it. And you have a deductibility that you're allowed to pursue as a charitable donation. So, me when I'm 70 and a half, I'm totally using my like IRAs. But if you are that trust fund baby that Peter kind of like, inherited a hedge fund sort of thing, and you were investing it, you didn't know you were going to be inheriting a hedge fund, you might have significant money in your IRA that would actually behoove you and your tax benefits to give to a nonprofit of your choosing. Now, if you are 70 and a half, you should have a financial investor if you have this kind of wealth that would be able to help advise you on exactly what your tax benefits are. So again, we're going to post information to help everyone else understand the general rules around this sort of thing. And, we're not telling you this is how you should be giving. We're talking to you as nonprofit professionals about things you need to be aware of if you have these type of individuals, to make sure you're planting the seed and advertising this as a good way of making money for their tax benefits. So again, helping to support you because it's a better tax deduction for them with the changing of the general tax rules. This will really have a difference for your older population.
But I think what's important to see is that there's going to be, it's going to affect nonprofit world, not just in 2026, but 2027, 2028.
Yes.
It's going to have a ripple effect, positive or negative, indifferent, what have you. Point is that that's part of the speculation. But I think you're right. Nonprofits should not only have the outlook of how this is going to, affect them this year, but going years, especially working on budgets, right? We talked earlier about today about budgets, and not every organization runs January through December 31st annual year. They run different years, sometimes July to June,
Yeah.
so to speak. So again, the tax code implements their budgetary, their funding. It should all be considered again, and it's often overwhelming to get that information on your own. There's distrust for the information. So I'm glad that you were able to conduct all this research, and especially sharing this valuable link, because I think it can outline all the complexities and things. And then again, it references trustworthy factual sources. So as much as the topic is very speculatory and complicated, I think the commonality is that nonprofits should consider things like that in their outlook for giving and fundraising.
Definitely. And then as it is fundraising as a whole, the big four in fundraising, we talk about corporate giving, we talk about foundations, all the types of foundations, individuals. And then I want to not be remiss and forget to, touch on events. Events are always all over the map. And that's not necessarily a reflection of economy or what's going on in the world. It's just a reflection of the fact that you need to know your audience. And for every single nonprofit, different events work different ways, sort of thing. So when we talk about events extremely broadly, as we've talked about, because corporate giving should be up, when we talk about like your golf tees and holes, sponsorship should be easier for those. When we talk about ticket sales, we're still going to be all over the place as we look at individuals and we look at, the wealthy versus the 1%, or the 1% versus the common man, in ways of, you just always have to make sure you're pricing it correctly. I encourage highly, if you think you can go for more money, don't just go for more money, offer a VIP ticket with extra perks, arriving early, a champagne reception, sort of thing. Then make sure that there's still that general admission ticket, that, sometimes, the common man wants to step up and do the VIP experience because it sounds like it has tons of pluses. And then sometimes, the VIP really wants the VIP experience. So they're willing to pay all sorts of extras and even sponsorships to get even more, extras with those sorts of things. But then again, there's still going to be like the $20 event that's always going to be important. Or a lot of times, I know definitely popular in Colorado and a couple other states becoming more popular is the no ticket event, where you're invited to like a breakfast or a lunch, and you've got a table host, and at some point in time they give you from the stage a very emotional appeal for funding, and then they're asking for donations. The no ticket event is still possible. And then I also reflect back to before 2020, when we're I think after 2020 we're all still debating sometimes if we want to leave our houses or not. But before 2020, when sometimes we felt like we were leaving our house too often, I was always a fan of the no-go event, where I basically make a donation and you send me a little something I can enjoy at home and I don't have to leave my house still. So I think that those types of events should be reconsidered for different reasons, just because we've changed how we think about going out in the world in various ways.
Yeah.
So whatever your event's going to be, just make sure it's specific to your audience and personal.
Well, and I'm hearing a commonality in a lot of things you're saying, right? You talked about niche events.
Yep.
You talk about niche passions. You talked about nonprofits and foundations tightening their belt and giving out on the community on local level. So again, it's a pendulum, right? You could look through generations. This time the pendulum is swinging again away from a large mammoth corporation. And I'm not saying that they're bad and they don't nonprofits, but again, it's moving a little bit more towards like what matters on my street corner, what matters in my town, what matters on the green where I can have a picnic, right? It's little things like that. So creative approach to understanding other humans' needs, whether it's nonprofit that's mission driven, or again, it's a person who is a little bit more established and has a little bit more money to give. Again, that's them understanding of the mission that nonprofit might be having challenges with or adjusting based on the circumstances we're talking about. So yeah, I think that that's really crucial to point out that all funding and kind of mentality is really focusing on being honest and being more human. Again, this passion and connectivity is strongly rooted in this just basic human need. Like if I like this, I'm going to support it. Like the grandma spaghetti example, right? Like you're going to go do the flyers. Again, are you going to do it for every grandma that starts a spaghetti company? No. And that's the pendulum, right? At what point, what matters? And I think that, especially with AI, I know we touched on it in the last video, you and I actually did together, ironically, but I think AI is as fantastic and as beautiful as we touched on. The downside of it, or the skeptical part of that society sees, at least in this country, is this, again, it's the stabilization of, do I trust this? Is this real or not? So if you could be authentic and passionate as a giver, as a restaurant owner, as the nonprofit organizer, as an outreach leader, as a consultant, as you are to nonprofits in your own right, I think collectively the focus really is inspire those connections, because that's what everything else gets built on.
In closing, there's really one thing I want to touch on one more time. And you and I have both made some historical references throughout our conversation today, sort of thing. A lot of 2025, there was so much that was unknown. And as we were going through 2025, another moment that makes me feel kind of old/established in the nonprofit world is I kept reflecting on how it felt so much like 2008, 2009, and 2010. And when we reflect back to those years, we're really talking a lot about the Enron Anderson scandal and the economic, huge, massive downturn. And what we saw from then, a little opposite of what we're forecasting now with, corporate giving. But what happened in that period of time was when we had this huge economic downturn, the values of who was donating to what completely changed. And then it also changed in a way that because the government was trying to help balance out people, that there was less funding for certain things. And again, we're seeing that weird change of what we're flexing and the government's, doing. And the people that really struggled, the nonprofits and organizations in 2008, 9, and 10, are the ones that didn't have diversified funding. So if you're only grant reliant and now you're a health organization, same as 2008, 9, and 10, you're going to be struggling if you haven't diversified already. If you're a workforce organization, you might see some ups in that area, but you still need to make sure you're diversifying as a whole because we don't know where pockets are going to be moving around as more and more of these changes come to fruition for January 1, 2027 and the Medicaid and Medicare changes. So again, we really need to be focusing on every nonprofit should always be focusing on all four, the individual giving, the corporate giving, the foundations, and even your events. Because in a lot of ways, your events are that stewardship aspect for both individuals and corporations, where we need to keep everybody close. We need to make our people inspired, whether it's about your grandma's pasta or what it is your nonprofit's doing. But we need to figure out how to make sure that we're keeping the focus on what do people and individuals and corporate leadership want to see sustain in our community.